Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it's my pleasure to have Sebastian Rusk with us. Sebastian is a podcast launch specialist. He's been building online communities for the last 15 years, and he's made it his mission to help people tell their stories by starting a podcast. Sebastian founded the podcast launchlab.com in 2016 as a turnkey podcast launch solution for marketers and entrepreneurs that want to start a podcast. He knows that everyone has an incredible story inside of them. All they need is someone to ask them questions so they can share it with the world. Sebastian is currently the host of the gritdaily.com startup podcast that covers the world of tech and startups, as well as NFTs Suck, a show dedicated to education about the world of Web3 and NFTs. Sebastian, it's so great to have you on the show.
Stephan, great to be here. Thanks for having me, bud.
So first of all, I'd love to hear how you ended up getting into the world of NFTs. So you have a podcast called NFTs Suck. So
Actually,
why that name? Why NFTs? Like, what's up with that?
Well, so I've got an explanation for all that, and it's a great question. So, new name of the show is Web3 Sucks. One to widen the net a little bit, because the world of Web3 is so much more than just NFTs. So I wanted to expand it. A couple of reasons I decided to start the show. Number one, I was part of Twitter's creator program for Twitter Spaces at the end of last year. So I was contracted by Twitter to host 2 Twitter Spaces a week. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to host a podcast. Or I'm going to create a new podcast. And number one. Number two, I'm going to do it about Web3 or NFTs at the time. For selfish reasons, I want to learn about this world because I don't even know what's happening here, but I need to understand and get ahead of the curve. So we did that for about 90 days. I was part of and the creator program ended in February. And I decided just to stay at it because it allowed me to better understand what's happening with this world and also start connecting with individuals that were building things and Web3 solutions, because that's it is where we're headed. I just don't think that the adoption is anywhere near where it will be eventually. But the same thing happens with all technology. There were skeptics with Web 1.0 and 2.0, and then of course Web 3.0. People were going, I don't need the metaverse or the blockchain, and I just think things are changing so rapidly. And like technology always is, it doesn't care about what we feel or what our feelings are about it. It's going to continue to move at the rate that it does, regardless if we take action. So as a thought leader, and a communicator and a podcaster, I thought, I want to understand this so I can get out and help people better understand what this is all about. So started off as, hey, let's see how it goes. And we've turned it into, pretty profitable side of the business where Web3 projects and NFT projects and things of that nature are featured on the show. So yeah, man, I'm just trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, that's fun. I'm actually working on a project. It might actually be launched by the time this episode airs. It's called Worst of Web3.
Yeah. Well, hey, you're gonna have plenty to talk about there. Yeah.
Yeah. And we come from a marketing angle with this. I partnered up with Greg Merrilies, founder of Studio One Design. And the idea behind it is highlight all the worst elements of the online marketing of various Web3 projects and companies. And then if they see it all in one place, represented in one website, then they can, kind of get some tips, tips and strategies on how to do it better. So
correct.
All the black backgrounds with the white text that makes it hard to read, all the convoluted language that people who are not immersed in that world but just won't get it. Just the lack of good, clear messaging, all that is going to be laid out on the worstofweb3.com. So yeah, we're launching that pretty soon.
Good times.
So I'm curious to hear about your other show, and you how long have you been doing that one? And so what is Grit? Grit 3, is it?
Yeah, it's
Grit Daily.
Sorry,
Grit Daily. What is it, and how did you start working on that podcast, and what's the mission there?
Yeah, so Grit Daily is a media outlet based in New York that covers the world of startup, a lot of Web3, a lot of blockchain. I was introduced to the founder of Grit Daily in 2018 via Gary V. Gary Vaynerchuk has been a longtime mentor of mine, and we connected early on in my career, probably late 2010. And 2018, he hosted a conference here in South Florida, and we got a chance to spend the day hanging out with him. And Jordan French was in the room that day that Gary made the introduction, and we hadn't done anything. Right after that introduction, we had stayed in touch, and then last year Art Basel came around, which ended up being NFT Basel, because so much of the Web3 community has inundated and taken over our lovely city here in Miami. So we did a couple of things. He hosted an event during Art Basel, and then he questioned, how can we continue to work together? And I said, you guys should. And do you guys have a podcast? They're like, well, we do, but it's not as consistent as it should be. And I'm like, well, you're leaving a lot of money on the table because you guys are a media outlet. And if you look at what Inc. has done in Entrepreneur Magazine and TechCrunch, I mean, these are large podcast networks that they've built and scaled accordingly to really complement their existing inventory of media coverage. They essentially publicists and PR reps looking for coverage for their clients. So this is just another avenue for them to be able to do it. So we launched a Grit Daily Startup Show. Really hit the ground running right out of the gate because they had Grit Daily already had a lot of inbound traffic as it was anyway. They're constantly getting thousands of pitches on a daily basis for coverage on gritdaily.com, and then they do offline events. So it's really turned into something great, not only a profitable podcast where we have we feature all kinds of different guests within the world of Web3 and startup, but we also do offline events for South by Southwest, and we did CoinDesk Consensus in June. We've got a house in downtown Austin where we convert into a speakeasy, and we put a podcast studio in there. So it's been really cool to be able to kind of take my online personality offline and be able to connect with new and existing faces while doing podcasting remotely and also at the events that are happening offline. So yeah, it's been fun to say the least. That's the second show I host, and then my main podcast is Beyond the Story that I've had for, since I started. I used it as a tool. I've changed the name 3 times, but it finally stuck with Beyond the Story back in 2017, I think it was. And that's just been my access key. That's been my ticket in the door to be able to get in front of people and meet individuals and learn from them, connect with them, do business with them. So yeah, all in with the podcasting game, and then that just really complements what I do to support my personal brand, in addition to writing books and speaking, and really just sharing whatever I know with the world out there. I think that's our responsibility when we've got a gift and a message to share.
Yeah. So the Beyond the Story podcast, what's the angle behind that, and how did you decide to get started with it?
Well, I started the podcast when I didn't have any money when I first started. So the only way I could interview people, like, hey, let's get you on the show and interview. It was more of like a formality to be able to get in front of somebody. That's how Gary and I connected. Well, I mean, I read his book. I read his first book, and then we started chatting via email, and then he did a book stop for his second book here in Miami. And then that led into where I interviewed him. We sat down and I had a whole camera crew call me, and that was a whole nother crazy story in and of itself on how it all came together. But my gift as a communicator is ability to sit down and have conversations with people and tell their story and make it all about them. And by default, I'm developing a relationship with those individuals. So Beyond the Story, I like to tell people, I like to go back before it all happened. Where did this whole thing start? Sometimes we go back to, what happened after high school? Did you go to college? Did you not? You're an entrepreneur. Did you get a job? Did you work for a job for umpteen years and realize you hate it and become an entrepreneur? So it's basically my opportunity to connect with new people, but by telling them their story and, by telling their story rather. And when I do that, I have the opportunity to build a relationship with them.
Right. And what would be an example of a relationship that's been life-changing for you? I know Gary Vee is one, but give me another example that came about because you interviewed the person on the podcast.
I would say that the scaling of our podcast agency has probably been the most impactful, because I meet people and have conversations with them, and then next thing you know, they're like, I want to start a podcast. Can you help me? And that's extremely impactful, because I always tell people that person became a client from a podcast interview. And that's really what I teach. I teach people, it's great to start a podcast, but if you're starting a podcast to get all these arbitrary download numbers and go chase sponsors and try to be the next Joe Rogan, it's a pretty tall order. Not saying that's not going to happen, but if you utilize a podcast as a tool to be able to build relationships that turn into profitable business relationships while creating content, you're achieving that content objective as well. At the same time, you're able to really check a lot of the boxes of the, what you should be doing content wise, networking wise, off, just because of podcasting. But Beyond the Story has been and it's still to this day. Anytime I want to meet somebody, connect with them further, whether it's offline or online, let's get you on the show. Because we can go anywhere from there. I don't care what you do, what your background is. You got a story, so let's tell it, and we'll figure it out from there. So that's been my main. I mean, I live that, and that's the strategy that I have, and it's also a strategy I teach.
Yeah. So really, be more strategic in picking guests is step one in a successful podcast, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I'd say, how do I monetize a podcast? You monetize your guests. Like, well, how do I do that? Well, you have conversations with them and you make it all about them. And at the end of the conversation, you've already built rapport with them. So for me not to say, Stephan, when are you starting a podcast? I mean, I end every conversation with that. I mean, I also wear podcasts suck if you don't have one t-shirts everywhere. It's a required uniform around here. But it's the name of my book too. So it's kind of a two-prong approach there.
That's funny. When you're talking about how you pick these guests to interview because they could be great business partners or clients or some sort of strategic relationship. It made me think of I recently watched a video of Vishen Lakhiani. He's the founder of Mind Valley. Have you heard of Mind Valley or
I have.
Vishen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool guy and a great company and platform that he's built. Well, the video, he's explaining in it that he started before Mind Valley to kind of get into the spiritual realm by going to a Silva method class or workshop. And at the time, he was working at a law firm software company. So these provided software to law firms. And he was a salesperson. I think he was commission only, and he was just barely making enough to, pay for food. Well, he came back from that workshop, and instead of going through the yellow pages of his target areas alphabetically, under law firms, one law firm after another, A through Z, he would tap into his intuition and only pick those firms that he felt drawn to, and his sales doubled. And they kept doing it, and his sales doubled again, and then it doubled again. And eventually, after some months, he was promoted to vice president. And then he went and started Mind Valley and everything. But what a great story! And how that relates to our conversation is that you can do the same thing with your podcast guests. You can tap into your intuition and feel into who you should invite onto the show. And it might be counter logic to say, well, this person wouldn't be a good fit. They don't seem to have the right profile for my ideal client avatar. But my intuition says get them on the show. And I should totally introduce you to this person. As we were talking in the interview, I just thought that this person would be a great connection for you, and then that becomes your biggest client. So this is the magic of tapping into your intuition. I'm curious to hear if you've had any of those kinds of coincidental, kind of serendipitous or synchronistic type experiences with your podcasts.
Yeah, I absolutely have. I mean, you never really know what's on the other side of it. When people start with us here and they go, I want to start a podcast, they come to us with the initial idea of, hey, I want to start a podcast. And we start to unpack that and figure out whether or not, they're a fit for us to work with them and vice versa. First things first is, figuring out if there's a viable idea in there, and are they really committed to what's happening, but also are they committed to the work that's involved, and are they committed to the time commitment? So we make everybody commit to a minimum of 12 months of production after we get them launched. And that's not just to lock somebody into an agreement for 12 months. That's to really help them understand that this is a macro deal. This isn't a micro. This isn't we'll record a couple episodes and try it. The days of we'll try it out are over. It's more of a let's create something and let's build something, and let's give ourselves 12 to 16 months before we give ourselves permission to throw the towel in and give up. So the serendipitous moments, the opportunities that come about through that through that process of launching a podcast and becoming a podcaster are, they run the gamut. I always tell people, I can't tell you what podcasting is going to do for your life and your business. I just know it's going to radically impact it if you're open to it. So, the surprise moments, the wow, I can't even believe that, and figured out, I end up interviewing people that I'm connected to. I was telling you that story before we started recording. I had a guest on the show yesterday, and I know her boyfriend from 20 years ago when I lived in Southern California. I mean, what are the odds? I know that technology really helps make that process a little bit easier these days, but you just never really know what's on the other side of the podcast, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah. No coincidences. Really cool.
No, none at all.
So,
Absolutely not.
so one of the premises that you have with your podcast Beyond the Story is that everyone has an incredible story inside of them.
Yep.
What is your signature story that you share pretty much every time you're speaking on stage, or you're doing a podcast interview or something? What's the story that blows people away?
Well, Stephan, the story started back in 2010. I moved back. Actually, story began in 2008. I moved back to Miami. Miami's home. Grew up here, and was living in Southern California for quite some time. Had a great little run out there, and then 2008 happened. So I lost everything, and I thought I had all the answers, and I didn't. It was a very humbling experience, to say the least. But I ended up back in Miami. I was a full-time single dad, raised my daughter on my own, and showed up here with a duffel bag and my daughter and some friends in low places. It was time to start all over again. In 2008, 2010, I did absolutely nothing. I was a complete degenerate, non-contributing member of society. I think a lot of people might have gone through that valley because it was, post-recession. But I knew that I had to get myself out of that. So in the midst of it, I'd taken a job in Las Vegas in 2009 as a consultant, did that for the summer. That was the first opportunity to get on a stage. It was for a network marketing company. I worked on the corporate side and developed training programs for them. And part of that was speaking. And man, I got on stage that first time, and I thought, this is it. This is it. And that was like my awakening moment to like the defibrillator of starting what that next chapter would be. Cause it took a lot of time for me just to get out of my own way and understand how in the world could I build something. And then you get to the top of the mountain, you find yourself at the bottom of the mountain. And I quickly realized that it was all my fault. Funny how that works out. But in 2010, I had an awakening moment, and I thought, I need to go see Tony Robbins. I need to go awaken the giant within. So I called my friend Whitney, who worked for Tony at the time. And she was in San Diego, and she gives me all the details for the upcoming UPW, Unleash the Power Within, which is his 101 event, if you will. Gives me all the details. It's supposed to be in Long Beach, California that year. And I hang up the phone. I'm like, all right, cool. I'll have to figure that out because I have like $8 to my name, maybe $7. But I knew that I wanted to do it. I was gaining momentum again. I'd already been on social media since the beginning, so I was a pioneer in that user space of the early LinkedIn days. LinkedIn was were the first players on the block. Then MySpace, and then of course Facebook came in and put their stake in the ground. And I had been an active user creating content. I just never applied that to my business. But I'd always told myself, if there's a way to market and generate new business because of social media, I'll be all in with that whenever that presents itself. Well, right after I hung up with my friend Whitney, she calls me back like an hour later, and she goes, I totally forgot that I wanted to introduce you to my best friend. She's actually on Tony's team. She's part of his core team. Of 6, and she travels everywhere with them. I think it'd be a good introduction. She lives on Miami Beach. I said, all right, cool. Make an introduction. I would love to meet her. So she does that right away, and I connect with this person, and we immediately hit it off. And similar personality, high energy. She's on Tony's core team. I knew buddies with Tony's son, so I know that caliber of community there, and it was worth an introduction for sure. So I said, let's meet for a drink on Friday. So we decided to link up that Friday, and I'll never forget it. We were in Miami Beach, having a drink, and she looks up to me and she says, "So what's next?" And I said, "I don't know." And she looked at me and she said, "That's a problem." That's the PG version of what she said. And these are my offended days. So I'm thinking, who in the world does this lady think she is, telling me that what I'm doing with my life is a problem? And I said, well, she's obviously doing a little bit better than I am, so maybe I should take some advice from her. I said, so what do you mean? And she looked at me and she said, Sebastian, who's missing out because you're not showing up? And I immediately thought, holy cow, it's not about me. And that Monday I went back. She's like, you sent me that video you created on your laptop in your living room, your energy, the way you show up. Like, dude, you don't learn these things. You don't go to school and acquire these things. These are naturally born gifts that you have as a communicator, the ability to be able to have the way that you show up in that presence. And for you not to use it, you're being grossly negligent. And I was like, enough said. I went and she goes, you started YouTube channels, a lot of social media, a lot of social buzz. You could start a TV show. And I was like, on YouTube, she's like, how about Social Buzz TV? And she's like, cool, that sounds great. So I sent that to a web designer that following Monday, and they came back with what would become the Social Buzz TV logo. So I was like, great. Now I have a logo and I have an idea of what I could potentially do. And right around that same time, I met Gary. And when I read Crush It, it really helped support what I was trying to do anyway, create content. But one of the first things he taught me was that your personal brand in perpetuity is your reputation. So you want to simultaneously build your personal brand in addition to your business brand. Now, everybody's got a personal brand now. Everybody's an entrepreneur now. But back in 2010, I was speaking Greek to most people. They just didn't understand why they would even need, kind of like where we're at right now with the metaverse. Almost identical. So I spent the next, I'd say 12 months evangelizing what Social Buzz TV was going to be and what it was. And I did that through means of networking events all through Miami. So I would show up at networking events with a flip cam and a bow tie on. Everybody lets the guy with a bow tie and the camera in the door. And I would put together a quick little video recap. And I'd say, hey, Stephan, I'll give you this free video recap of the event. Just tell your people about me. And I'm like, all right, cool. Well, eventually I was like, maybe I can start doing my own networking events. So in January 2011, I talked to folks over at Morton's here in Coral Gables into the event person I had a good relationship with. So I talked her into letting me host a networking event there where they would give me 2 free drinks and past appetizers for free, and I would just bring people to the event. Now, typically you're paying per head, you're paying for those drinks and the past food, etc. I had different plans because I was like, listen, I don't have any money, but I got a tremendous amount of talent. I'm going to have people show up here. I don't know how many people, but if it's 10 and it's 10 people that have never been here, it's 10 people you haven't met yet. So your people meet my people, and it'll work out great. Oh, and one more thing. I need the room upstairs the day after because I'm going to bring everybody back for a social media boot camp. So my motto became networking, hosting my own networking events, bringing sponsors in, and then say, hey, come back tomorrow. We're going to do a social media boot camp upstairs. I'm going to tell you everything I know about social media, and then we're going to have lunch, and we'll see what transpires from there. Well, that model started to work because people would say, hey, Sebastian, I've been to your networking event. I've been to your boot camp. I saw you at another event. I saw you speak at the chamber, whatever it was. And I want to start with this social media thing for my business. I want to figure this whole thing out. So people started to pay me. And back in those days, my ideal client was anybody with a checkbook. I mean, you had a budget of $400 a month. I'll watch your kids on the weekend, wash your car. No. I was all in. I couldn't believe that people were going to pay me $500 a month to set up their Facebook page and post content to it. And then shortly after that, my speaking business started to evolve and be something where I would be asked to speak at specific events, or right at that point in time, I didn't care. You had a soapbox in your backyard, I'm in. Church groups, Rotary groups, chambers, you name it. If there was more than one person in the audience, I'm in. So, and I learned that. I learned along. I knew that I was a strong part of my personal brand was my speaking business, and as a communicator, it's my responsibility too. Because even when people can't afford to work with me, they hear me. They hear me give a talk. I've been able to pour into them. They knew something they didn't know. They didn't know. Everybody wins. I was tipped off by a fellow speaker that I should probably get involved with the National Speakers Association. So in 2013, I think, I reached out to the National Speakers Association with my normal pitch. Hey, listen, my name's Sebastian Rusk. I own a company called Social Buzz TV. I'm a speaker, and I would like to come cover the conference as media. Are you guys inviting press and media? And they're like, not really, not normally. I'm like, all right, well, listen, I wear bow ties and I run around with a camera and this thing called a selfie stick. Trust me, you want me there. So they let me go. They let me do it. And I flew to Philadelphia, and I had like 2 people that I knew there out of like 2,500 speakers. But I walked in the room and I thought, wow, though, this is the big leagues. I was in a room with 2,500 other professional speakers, many people that have been around doing it longer than I had been alive. But I'm like, I'm in the right room because I'm the brokest guy here with the least experience, but I know something that they don't. And that is the world of social media, where we're at, where we're going, how to create content, how to figure it all out. So you may have been speaking for 30 years. That's cool and everything, but you haven't been doing anything with social media. So I found that common ground where I can meet speakers. Again, the interview approach. Keynote speaker at the conference gets off stage. They're coming by. They're doing photo opportunities and a book signing. Guess what? I walk up with a bow tie and a camera and go, can I interview you? And they say, yes, you can. Absolutely. Who doesn't want to be interviewed at their own book table after they've nailed a keynote speech in front of 2,500 of their peers? Everyone wants to do that. And I was able to convert a lot of those individuals, the speakers, my peers, into clients. In fact, it took a couple of years for that ripple effect to happen. But the keynote that year, I'll never forget, her name's Robin Benincasa. I have to look her up. She's a world extreme sports individual, does a lot of great charity work now as a firefighter in Southern California too. But she did this big, huge, gigantic extreme race and did all these crazy things. And that's what her talk was all about. Years later, she called me and we set up social and ran it for her nonprofit for a few years. So the ripple effect came in there. But what really came out of attending the National Speakers Association conference was that my first book deal. So one of the sponsors was a company called Advantage Media. It's now Forbes Advantage Media because Forbes partnered with them, but they focused on helping speakers write books. So speakers and entrepreneurs, that's their niche. And the guy that owns the company, Adam Whitty, I was introduced to, said, hey, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, this guy's 7'2". So I was literally looking up to the guy. And I said, Adam, I think about it every day. But I'd rather roll out of bed, punch myself in the face, and eat broken glass than write another chapter. And he said, well, what about if you could talk your book? And I was like, well, dude, I can talk till the cows come home. He's like, great. We have a talk your book program where we interview you, and then we transcribe that interview and we break it and dissect it down. Next thing you know, we got a book in a timely fashion. We usually get this knocked out in 90 days or so. I said, that's fantastic. What's something like that cost? He says, $25,000. And I immediately, I'm silently going, is this guy crazy? But I immediately was like, 25 grand. I think I said something like, that's not bad. That's not bad. So my next question, because this was my early days of figuring out, I didn't have any money to pay anybody. But I had an extreme amount of talent and opportunity and ideas and stuff, how we can help each other. So I looked at him, I said, Adam, do you guys have a social media strategy? You absolutely need one. You're targeting speakers and entrepreneurs and business owners. You write books, for crying out loud. You need a social media strategy. This is where we're headed. He goes, we don't. We have a deficit in that area. Our marketing department could really utilize some of that. I was like, perfect. Would you be open to doing some sort of barter or trade? Because I charge $2,000 a month, and you charge almost $2,000 a month over the course of a year. I mean, it's pretty much it's pretty much a wash. And he goes, I think so. I think we can totally make this deal work. So that was in July, I think, or August, and then I think we had our first call by September, and we'd already struck the deal by October, and I had written the book. I think I broke a record because I was so excited and all just ready to rock and roll. I think we got that thing done in I think we started writing in November and was done by February, I think. And then we helped them launch their social media strategy. So I wrote my first book, Social Media Sucks, if you don't know what you're doing. And that's where the whole sucks came about, because at first it was going to be like Social Media 101. And I had a branding friend of mine go, that's not going to work with your personality. And I'm like, how about Social Media Sucks? And she goes, that's it. So that the whole sucks theme is that shock element is where it came. And I really told this whole story, but then also my perspective of where we're at, where we're going with this whole social media thing. I did include a chapter about Google Plus. That was my only mistake with the book. Rest in peace, Google Plus. But that's what happens with technology and where it's all at. But that really allowed me to establish myself as a speaker, especially back in the day. Everyone's writing a book. Everyone wants to speak. Everyone's got a personal brand these days. Right. But back then, writing a book was still, it was still admirable. I mean, it still is to this day, but it's not so frequently done. But on the back of that, came a lot of clients, came a lot of new speaking opportunities. But at the same time, I had a lot of personal struggles where, not really knowing what my why was and what I was doing. I mean, when I look back now, I was like, gosh, it was just a bunch of noise, man, you were noisy. But that was a lack of healing in my department and in my life that I realized. But I had that nudge. I constantly had that nudge that there's more there, Sebastian, because we're evolving and we've built something from nothing, and we've gone from nothing to something, and things are happening. but there's still more there. Like, you're kind of a dick. Like, you need to work on a few things to really get this whole thing like tweaked out. But I would resist it. It's like, hey, you're a dick. You really need to tweak these things. Sebastian's conversation with myself. Yet I would resist any type of help. I'd be open to go to Tony Robbins, go walk on fire, go to the Landmark Forum. I was a personal development junkie. But when it came to implementation, when it came to integration, nada. Come home with just do nothing. I think a lot of us do that. We go to, when you go to something that pours into your life, a personal development course or whatever it might be, and you come back and don't do anything. You don't do anything with it. But I continue to remain curious because I knew that whatever I'm building, if I don't figure this out, then I'm just going to destroy whatever I'm building anyway. Because if they always say, if you're a jerk before you make money, making money is just going to make you a bigger jerk because it just magnifies.
Money just amplifies who you already are. Yeah.
Correct. Exactly. So I wanted to figure all of that out and tweak all that out. So if we fast forward to 2016, I was still doing agencies, doing great. We're growing. I'm speaking. I'm the social media guy. I'm the bow tie guy. I'm speaking guy. All this stuff's starting to come together. And in the midst of this, I create a brand as an MC too. So I started MCing conferences. So if I couldn't get booked to speak, I would MC conferences. I got my real big break happened with a company called digitalmarketer.com. They host a large event every year called the Traffic and Conversion Summit. And I did that show for about 4 years. Met the founder, Ryan Dice, via Twitter and just pitched him cold. Hey, need a guy with a bow tie to rock the stage? He's like, actually, we do. Next morning, he called me and booked me. And people were like, what do you mean Ryan Dice just called you and booked you for Traffic and Conversion? So that was a fun little stint in between all that. But I quickly realized that I wanted to be the star of the show. And being the MC does not allow me to be the star of the show. You're a hired gun. That's all you are. That's it. You show up, you do your job, you go home. That's it. You're not the star of the show. And I wanted to be the star of the show. So I kind of tapered off MC work actually over the past, probably 3 or 4 years, and just honing in on speaking. But in 2016 was the definitive year where everything radically changed. I wanted a girlfriend, so I decided to hop on a dating app. Met a girl in downtown Fort Lauderdale. Lived right off of Las Olas, for those of you familiar with the area, and we met on March 1st, 2016. I'll never forget it. And we sat down, met for a beer, and she goes, I'm in the middle of this personal development course right now. It's called gratitude training. And I'm like, oh, cool. They train you how to be grateful. She's like, not even a little bit. It's like a personal development course. And I was like, oh, well, let me tell you about my personal development experience. So we had that common denominator right off the bat. She eventually got me in the doors of that training, as resistant as I was. And that training was a hybrid of Tony Robbins, that I'd been to before a couple times, and the Landmark Forum, completely different element of personal development, more of a conversation. Tony's rah-rah. Yeah. This was a hybrid of both of those, because there was 3 parts of the program
with gratitude. That course, they specifically go out of their way to trigger you. I've heard
Have you done
stories. I've not done that one. I've done a lot of personal development, a lot of Tony Robbins, a lot of other types of.
They're no longer, unfortunately, the movement didn't make it, but it took them out. But unfortunately, there was a hurricane and a series of other issues, but there was a movement for a while happening that a lot of people went through. My daughter went through the program. It's a beautiful experience. I wish it was still around. Maybe I should bring it back. But the first part of it is you spend a long weekend. It's Friday to Sunday, and just kind of figure out what's going on. And then part 2, you really go in and figure out where did the trauma first start? Where did the pain first start? Where did when did all that happen? And then as you start to unpack all this, what happened on the other side of this was that I came out realizing that my problem, that I constantly had that nudge that there's got to be more there, and why I was so angry and I was so was because I hated myself. I had absolutely zero self-love and respect. I would say one thing, but then I believed a completely different thing. So I would say one thing externally, and I would believe a completely different thing. And those are conflicting feelings. They just don't. They're conflicting ways of showing up and ways of being that just simply don't work. So on the back of gratitude training, after going through it and being extremely resistant and walking out 100 times, having the girl break up with me in the middle of, like, personal development is like tough enough. Then you get dumped in the middle of it.
Oh, no.
So it was, yeah. You talk about an emotional, absolute, just, chaos. I was there, but I got through it. And when I got done with the second part of it, it was, I feel like I took like all of 2016 off, because when you really go in to do this inward work, the world kind of just stops and you're so focused on just undoing whatever, at that time I was 35, 36 years old, 36 years of, this. So it was probably September. I had another awakening moment, and I was in bed for like a month after that. She broke up with me. I'm just beat down from the core. I'm just like, this whole this whole rebirth, if you will.
Yeah.
Now that I look back, it was hell then. But I woke up and I was like, enough. I'm not doing this anymore. Relationship's over. We got through gratitude. I started the third part and then bailed. I didn't have the emotional capacity to show up and see her volunteering there every week, in addition to trying to go through the course. So made it through the first two, which were extremely impactful and the best parts about it, in my opinion. And I got up one day and decided I'm going to go get a desk at a co-working space, and I'm going to figure out what my next move is. I got a couple clients still left, barely hanging on, that pay me a couple grand a month, and I'm just, squeaking by here. We got to figure out what's next, because here's one thing I do know for sure. I hate social media and the work involved with it. I literally loathe having to do the actual work. So we were creating content and helping that stuff up, but yeah, exactly. I didn't want to do any of that work anymore. I hated it. I got the agency. We're doing like 10, 12 grand a month. It wasn't a ton of dough, but it was for something from nothing. It was, but I just was not passionate about it anymore. It was very labor intensive too. I had to go meet with clients. We had to shoot the content. I didn't want to do any of that stuff. I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to speak, I wanted to write books, and I wanted to create content. That's all that I really wanted to do. I had still had my podcast, but not as consistent as I could. And I ran into a friend of mine in that co-working space, and she had an internet radio show. And I was like, what's that? And she's like, oh, it's an internet radio show. It does this, that, and the other. I'm like, it's not that hard. Like, you can start a podcast. She's like, I don't know how to do that. Can you help me start a podcast? And I was like, actually, I can. She never ended up starting a podcast. I think I helped her buy a podcast mic, and we dated for a few months after that. So it ended up working out to a certain extent on there. But we didn't end up starting her podcast, but that conversation was the eye opener for, okay, this is what's next. And I immediately after that conversation went to my desk there in the co-working space, and I mapped out what would become the Podcast Launch Lab, which would be a turnkey podcast launch solution to help people go from idea to iTunes in 90 days or less by starting a podcast. And this is the only thing I'm going to do. I'm going to start phasing out all this social buzz work, and we're going to start talking about podcast. My content's going to be about podcasting. My talks are going to be about podcasting. My books are going to be, it's going to be all things podcasting. Because the funny thing is, Stephan, because when I would see people around town, they'd be like, hey, how's the podcast going? Because they think like a YouTube video is a podcast, or they think, a post on Facebook is a podcast. People don't know the difference. So people kept saying podcast. So it's funny that people would identify that, but I'm so grateful for gratitude training, as redundant as that is, because I learned how to love myself, learned how to do the work. But the biggest gift I got out of that was that I took full accountability for my life, realizing that every single thing that happens to my life is my fault and my responsibility. And taking full ownership of your life provides a tremendous amount of freedom. So I launched the Podcast Launch Lab in 2016, and I have not looked back since. By 2019, we were self-sufficient as far as just podcast work, where I would decline any social buzz work. I have one client left with Social Buzz. He's also my best friend and a large attorney here in town, very well connected. It makes sense for me to continue to do that. Plus, it's kind of special circumstances because he's my bro. But outside of that, the only thing I focus on, if it has to do with, I have one rule. If it has to do with podcasting, I'm in. That's speaking, books, consulting, clients, etc. But here I am 6 years later, almost 7 years later, still healing. It's a lifetime process. We're never done. I'm committed to the work till my last breath. And the beautiful part about the work and constantly improving ourselves is that others around us start to pick up that same thing. We don't have to do anything. I always say, when you heal, others around you start healing. You don't have to do anything about it, which is wild. And I've experienced, and I still live it. And part of that process and this story has become applicable in my business. I had a client tell me a couple of weeks ago, Sebastian, what you do has very little to do with podcasting. I was like, huh? Am I doing something wrong? She's like, no, you're doing it all right, dude.
You're off topic.
You're doing it all. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I was like, are you sure? And she goes, no, because like the person I was before I started with you and the person I am now, completely different.
Yeah.
Because I just like to call a spade a spade. A podcast is a lot like life, because there's a lot involved with it: mindset, commitment, keeping our word, doing what you say you're going to do, communicating, talking. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, man, I'm living the dream now. I have not made it, air quotes, yet. Made it in my book, and my definition of making it is I have the opportunity to never work again if I choose to, but I choose to work because that's what we do, and that's what life's all about. And I do meaningful work, and I help people become the best versions of themselves, and for themselves and for their business and for their family through means of podcasting. So podcasting has really been that catalyst to help with that process. But I would say, that's my story up to this date. It continues to get more and more interesting, and I'm grateful for it all. But I'm working a third of the time and making 10 times the money. It's funny how that works out. I used to think hard work and that grind 8 days a week and 12-hour days, it equals more. It doesn't equal more business.
Yeah.
Funny how that works
But
out.
Gary Vee, he talks all about doing the hustle, hustling to get more business.
Correct.
And
When you're on the grind, exactly. When you're on the grind and you're building your brand, hit that. His whole message from that is, if you're going to sit around and complain, there's plenty of opportunity out there. That's his idea of being able to, but that's his thing. Business is his thing. He's not a flashy guy. He's not a cars and watches and houses, and he doesn't care about all that. And he's extremely wealthy. He cares about impact and his legacy, and he's doing a damn good job of handling both of those. And just a stellar human being. Just
Mhm.
a great human. One of my favorite people.
Yeah, awesome. I'd love to have him on my show, but haven't been able to get him yet. Adam Whitty, I did have on. Ryan Dice, I've had on.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, Adam's great, man. I haven't seen him in years, but yeah, he's another great human. Ryan Dice too, man. Ryan's just salt of the earth.
Yeah. Awesome. And so what did happen from going to UPW, doing the fire walk, because that changed my entire world. Just walking on fire on the 2,000-degree hot coals changed everything for me. 2 weeks after, I went and got LASIK. 2 or 3 months after that, I went and got a hair transplant. I changed my diet. I started working out. Oh, this is here. I'll show you a picture of what I used to look like. This is a bit of a shocker. Look at that. That was me in 2007.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Nice work,
So,
dude.
so Tony got me started with that journey. And
He's the best.
for those who
Best in
are
the
not
biz.
watching the video, I look like, I don't know, 20 years older than I do now, and that was 15 years ago.
Yeah, Tony's fantastic. Those were my non-integrating days, so I didn't get a ton from those days. In fact, it's time for a revisit. I've had Date with Destiny on my list of to-dos.
Oh, that's
I may make that
amazing. That's his
happen.
best event. That's where I met my wife.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
All right, now I'm even more intrigued because I'm single these days. So if you meet abroad at a personal development conference, you're probably on the right track.
Well, everything
Yeah.
happens magically doesn't even begin to start to explain it, but everything is so divinely precisely orchestrated. Like that was yeah, that was meant for me. And I prayed for her to show up the morning of the last day of the event, and at the very end of the event, in the lobby after everything finished, a mutual friend introduced us. And there's this thing called the Diksha, the oneness blessing, where you put your hands on somebody's head and you're praying for them, and it passes divine grace. You're just the conduit. So it's really powerful. And I'd learned how to do that on a Tony Robbins Platinum Partner trip in India. And yeah, when I did that for her, 10 minutes into meeting her, the more you pray for the person, the more that the divine grace passes through you. And I prayed for her like she was my soulmate. So I knew within minutes of meeting her that she was my soulmate. Yeah.
Wow.
And I
Are
proposed
you
9
still a
days
platinum
after we
partner?
met, and she said no, and it was a hot air balloon. It was really awkward, 20-minute descent back down to earth.
Yeah. Well, you could have pushed her out of it, but then you wouldn't have been able to marry her.
But I re-proposed 9 months later, and she said yes. So we've got a 3-year-old son now, and it's just magic. Amazing.
Amazing, dude. I mean, I love that. That's a great story. Are you still a platinum partner with Tony?
No, I did 3 years. Last year was 2013, but I do a ton of other masterminds and personal development things. Metal is
Yeah.
one of them. That's how I heard about you. And let's see, what else am I doing currently? JVMM.
Yeah. Where did you find me besides LinkedIn?
Yeah, it was Metal. I think it was Metal.
Metal? I don't know what that is.
Oh, okay. So it must have been a different mastermind. Um, I don't. Some media entertainment technology alpha leaders. That's Ken Rutkowski's
Okay.
mastermind. Yeah. So I
Got it.
thought it was that,
Yeah.
but
No,
maybe it was a different one. I'm in 5 or so. I can't even keep track of them all. Genius Network is another
I'm in.
one. I'm in. Joe
Yeah.
Polish's
Joe
mastermind.
Polish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm in one. I'm in one out of Dallas, Apex.
Okay.
That's the only one I'm involved in them all. But Platinum Partnerships on my list has been for, well, since I went to UPW. I mean, you have to not have a pulse to not be like, I want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was amazing. It was amazing. That led to my spiritual awakening in 2012 in India. I got touched on the head, got the Diksha from this oneness monk. And yeah, everything was different from that moment on. It was like a psychedelic experience. Everything was in Technicolor, like a cartoon. I felt this deep sense of peace and connection, and I felt the Creator. And I'd been agnostic my whole life up until that point. Changed everything. But yeah,
Cool.
it's been quite a journey for me too, and Tony Robbins started it off for me, but really it's our journey. We can't put somebody like Tony or anybody else or any other program or a religion or anything as the intermediary. It's a direct connection to the Creator.
Yeah.
And yeah, anytime you go through an intermediary, that's not good. That's really not good. It's idol worship, really. It's the contemporary version of it, and yeah, no good.
What are some examples of that?
So
Would you
anytime
say?
that, let's say that somebody is Jewish, but they follow a particular rabbi. I forget
Yeah.
there's one rabbi that his picture is on all sorts of billboards, and he's a big name rabbi. You put somebody like that on a pedestal, and that's essentially a false idol. If you have
Right.
a particular guru that you follow, it could be personal development, it could be spiritual, it could be business guru or somebody, and that's how you're getting your guidance and your insights and so forth, instead of developing the direct connection to God. Yeah, anything
Right.
like that is an example. It's dangerous.
Well, I struggled a lot with that with the healing stuff because I'm a devout Christian myself, and I believe Jesus is the ultimate healer, and Holy Spirit lives within us, which is another and a huge healing component. So to go like do a Reiki ceremony and have man come and like try to facilitate healing, I was completely apprehensive about it. So I didn't end up doing any Reiki sessions or anything. But when I was first starting to do a Fiji breath work, it was comparable to that. But at the same time, I talked to a couple Christian friends of mine. Not that Christians have all the answers by any stretch of the imagination, but I was like, hey, listen, this whole like woo movement of like, modern spirituality, whatever you want to call it. What do you think about that? And he said, I believe God will use whatever and whoever he needs to get the job done.
Hmm.
So maybe something to consider is that Jesus sent her to facilitate this breathwork practice and to get you into
For sure.
this next level of healing for what you're doing. And I was all in from that. It literally radically changed my life. Radically.
Well, you
I
know
mean,
the
almost more
story.
than
There's a little parable about there's a guy who's um, stranded in his house. The flooding is really bad. He can't get out, and so he's sitting on the roof. And then a guy comes by in a rowboat and says, "Hey, I'm here to save you. And guy says, no, God's going to save me. I'm waiting for God to save me. I asked God to save me. And he's like, okay, well, good luck with that. And he paddles off. And then the helicopter comes eventually, and the water keeps rising, and it's really bad. It's like up to the second story, and he's still on the roof, and he shoos away the helicopter. No, I'm waiting for God, and I forget what else comes, like a Coast Guard or something, and he just doesn't budge, and then he drowns. And at the pearly gates, he's like, I was waiting for you. He's like, what are you talking about? First, I sent you a rowboat, and then I sent you a helicopter,
Yeah.
and the Coast Guard, and you ignored all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm really grateful for that. It was, it's just a matter of, of staying open. There's a lot of freedom in staying open, just open to what, what's available. Just like you had mentioned early, I did learn that at UPW, that there are no mistakes. Life is an orchestrated journey of ongoing lessons, good, bad, or indifferent. Tony would pose the question, what if, I'll never forget that, real impactful. Like, what if life is just a guided journey, and that's when he kind of goes into the whole life is happening for you, not to you.
Right. And then there's another level to it that he didn't share at UPW. Life is happening by you. Right. What if your higher self, your soul, and its higher perspective above the canopy of the trees could see the bigger picture and write the script of your story for you to play out, like you're acting in a play, and you don't realize it. What if that's what's happening? And then it's actually by you too, not just for you.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
Cool. Well, I know we're getting close to time here. So if somebody wanted to work with you on launching their podcast, or what if they already have a podcast and they just want to increase their reach and their impact, is that something that you help with as well? And if so, well, what do they do? What's the next step? How do they work with you?
Yeah, so we don't do anything with existing shows. I just found a real knack for helping people start a podcast and then helping them support the production ongoing, and part of that is the growth aspect. And we work with the shows that we do launch, but we don't take on any existing shows that we didn't actually launch. But if you're thinking about starting a podcast, or you used to have a podcast and you want to start a podcast again, whatever the case is, I'd be more than happy to chat with you about what's possible and see if you're a fit for our program. You can schedule a call with me at and I'm sure Stephan will include this in the show notes, but
I will.
podcastlaunchlabnow.com, podcastlaunchlabnow.com will take you right to my calendar, and we can chat for a couple minutes about what's possible. But if you're listening to this right now and you've been on the fence, if you had any inclination about starting a podcast, someone's told you should do it, you have the gut feeling, whatever it might be, that's reason enough to really take some action and figure it out, whether it's you hire somebody or you read a book or you watch a YouTube channel, whatever the case may be. The world's waiting for you to get that message out. And like I was told, some 12 years ago, who's missing out when you don't show up? So
that's right.
Stephan, I really appreciate the opportunity here, and thanks for having me on, man.
You bet. And thank you. And listener, viewer, I really want you to take some massive action. Just like Tony Robbins says, take massive action. If you are considering starting a podcast, work with Sebastian. Take something out of your head and share it with the world, because you're not changing the world until you take action. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.